Whether you operate one forklift or thousands, one location or hundreds, the new My Toyota customer portal can help you optimize your operation and material handling equipment. This one-stop, free-to-use platform is designed to help you take control of your information and make smarter decisions, all at the touch of a button. Register and access your data today at my.toyotaforklift.com. That's my.toyotaforklift.com.
The New Warehouse Podcast, hosted by Kevin Lawton, is your source for insights and ideas from the distribution, transportation, and logistics industry. A new episode every Monday morning brings you the latest from industry experts and thought leaders. And now, here's Kevin.
Hey guys, welcome to the New Warehouse Podcast. This is episode 3. We have Dean Dorcas on the show today. He is the CEO and founder of Easy Metrics. He's going to talk to us about his career, how he ended up founding Easy Metrics, and we're going to talk a little bit about the labor market in operations and distribution, and kind of labor tracking as well. So Dean, welcome to the show. How are you today?
Well, thank you, Kevin. I'm doing well.
Good to hear. Thanks for joining us in Seattle, right?
Yes.
All right. Thanks for calling in. So why don't you give us a little bit of information about your background, kind of what your career has been like, and kind of how did you get to the point of creating your company, Easy Metrics?
Yeah, absolutely. So I went to the United States Naval Academy, and one of my classmates there, Dan Keto, he and I were both very entrepreneurial. So after our time as officers in the Navy, I called him up, and he was already up in Seattle. I was moving back there. And so we decided we were going to start a company at the time, we were going to do staffing up in Seattle. And so we started the company and quickly realized that that was not the industry we wanted to be in. So we decided we needed to move up the value chain. So instead of just supplying companies with people, we decided we wanted to start running the operations for them, as well as providing the teams to do that. And so in order to do that, we obviously had to do it at a fixed cost basis if we're going to be taking on that responsibility. So we were the first group in the Pacific Northwest to go into labor-intensive operations, give them a fixed cost bid that was less than they could do it themselves, send in the management crew, and then run those operations for them. And if we're going to do that, obviously we had to come up with ways to drive productivity higher, drive our cost of labor down. So we're always very focused on systems, processes, what the best way to impact productivity was. And that company scaled quickly. We were one of the fastest growing companies in Washington State 3 different times. And eventually we started running distribution centers for large retail companies, for Target, Walmart, and Home Depot. But when we got up to that level, that scale, what we realized is the systems that we had been using or developed up until that point, they just weren't robust enough to handle that level of scale. So if you think about the Target distribution center, it was 300 employees. It was a 24/7 operation. Yeah. And the expectations were about a 17% improvement in productivity for us to be able to make that profitable. So it was pretty significant, and it was very much a challenge. And as we looked around, the biggest challenge we had when you're running that many people is you just don't really have good visibility or understanding of who's performing well, who's not performing well. We'd hear stories about people going to sleep in the back of a container at 2 a.m. behind some boxes, but we wouldn't know who it was. So we just really struggled. We just know the graveyard shift missed their numbers last night. Yeah. So as we looked around in the market, there wasn't anything out there software-wise that could really do what we needed to be done. So we ended up making the decision to develop the software ourselves. And we really wanted to focus on 3 things. First one, we needed to understand our cost to serve, because we've been in all these different projects on a fixed cost basis, and a lot of different product type and different workflows, et cetera. So we had to know what our cost was to do all these different processes. The second one, obviously, is we needed to understand our performance, which employees are performing well, which employees aren't. And even though the product type was very different, so we couldn't just say, well, you're at 80 cases an hour, you're at 100 cases an hour. That was very meaningless. So we had to add a lot of items. I had to look at a lot of different variables and metrics in there. And then finally, and this was really key for us, is once we knew our cost and once we knew who was performing and not performing, then we could develop a pay-for-performance program at an individual level and set stretch goals for our teammates. If they achieve those stretch goals, we know that they were going to hit the numbers, or we'd be profitable at that, and so we could share the rewards with them. So a pay-for-performance system designed properly was really critical. So we ended up developing that system. We rolled it out when we took on a Walmart cross-dock operation up there, and within the first year, we took them from 73 cases an hour up to 157 cases an hour. So we more than doubled their productivity.
Wow.
Ended up saving that. Oh, thank you. Ended up saving the operation about $1.5 million a year. We made good margins, and our employees, they're making great money. They're making $3, $4 an hour bonus on top of their base pay because of the pay for performance. And that operation became number one in that network for I think 3 years in a row. Wow. So it was very successful. But as we looked at it, it wasn't that we were these amazing managers. It's really we had some great tools and great systems. And so fast forward a couple of years, we finally made the decision that the software is really where the value was, not trying to expand the outsourcing operation around the country. So we sold off that business to Pro Logistics, one of the national staffing firms, and spun off the software and got VC funded, and all that happened about 2013.
Nice, wow. So originally you kind of started as, it sounds like almost like a 3PL business, and then you kind of discovered that the system that you're developing is really where it's at, right?
Yeah, the software is really creating all the value, but trying to use that to manage the outsourcing operations meant that we had to take on 100% of the kind of the challenges or requirements of running an operation, just trying to leverage the software value. So at the end of the day, we decided we just wanted to become a software firm and take what we learned to get to that point and apply that and give those as tools to other people to run their own operations.
Interesting. So definitely impressive performance and achievements there with Walmart. So I got to ask you, I know I hear from a customer perspective and a vendor perspective, providing goods to Walmart is very difficult. So I'm curious, on the software provider side, is it as difficult as it is for vendors?
So when we were doing the outsourcing side of it, I would say yes, it's definitely very challenging. Yeah. I would say that they're a great company to work with. I really appreciated their approach. If you came to them and said, we've got a constraint here, here's the challenge, here's some solutions, they were very open as long as you could explain your idea. So in that sense, it was a great company to work with. The challenge came down to just obviously, what was acceptable on year one is no longer acceptable, and you keep pushing higher and higher and higher. So I talked about the 157 cases per hour. Yeah. By the time we sold off the company, done working with them, we were over 200 cases an hour. So we kept pushing that productivity up, but our margin didn't go up in alignment with that higher productivity. But no, overall, I thought they were a great company to work with.
Okay. Yeah, just curious because I was actually somebody was telling me a story the other day about the first time they went way back, I think it was in the 80s, they were going to go and they were going to start supplying Walmart with their product. And they said, they took all the time, they flew down there, and there was no airport close by, so they had to find the airport, drive down. They said they walked in and a guy just came out and just gave them the compliance manual and said, thanks for coming. And they said, wait. And he said, no, everything's in the manual. That's it. Thanks for coming. So it's pretty interesting. And I've worked with them in the past as well from a compliance standpoint. So definitely, they're definitely stringent, but I think they make you kind of get your operation in line. And what they ask for makes sense. It makes their operation more efficient as well. And I think in the end, it makes you somewhat more efficient too. So, Easy Metrics definitely an interesting system, and obviously, the results are there from what you've told us already. But, tell us a little bit more about, Easy Metrics. How does it compare to other systems, and what's the difference really?
Yeah, great question. So in one way, it's very similar. We all focus on identifying employee performance, who's performing well, not performing well, and taking all those different variables into account when you're doing that. A simple example, is if I go to one location, I pick 100 units, you go to 10 locations, you pick 100 units. The WMS might, if it's reporting on cases per hour, it might make it look like I'm a superstar. If it's reporting on lines per hour, it makes it look like you're a superstar.
Less
so
travel time,
yeah, so there's a lot of factors that go into it. So pretty much any labor management system is going to look at all those different factors and identify who's doing well and who's not doing well, and that's an important tool to have. I think where Easy Metrics is different is where we came from being operators and developing systems to be used by our managers and our teams. We've focused on a few different things. One of those obviously is the cost to serve and really understanding where every dollar is being spent within the facility, what my cost is to do each type of job I'm doing, even taking that down. I had one customer that looked and said, when I'm picking products, it's great to know my cost to pick, but I want to know my cost when I'm picking, apparel versus shoes, or when I'm picking for shoes, is it an e-commerce order versus a retailer order? And then even if it's an e-commerce order, or say it's a retailer order, what's my cost when it's a rush order versus a regular order? And really understanding that so that I can make decisions when we're doing a rush order, how's that impacting my cost structure? Or as my e-commerce becomes a bigger part of my business, what's that doing to my cost structure? Because my cost per unit might look like it's getting worse. I want to understand why and really be able to slice and dice down to that level. That's something that was absolutely critical for us when we were running those operations. So cost to serve is a really big part of what we built into the system. And then likewise, pay for performance. We're probably the biggest proponents of pay for performance out there, primarily because of our old company. All of those operations that we ran on pay for performance. We couldn't have been in business if we hadn't done that. So I like to say pay for performance is kind of like playing with dynamite. It's very useful if done the right way. If done the wrong way, it's going to blow up in your hands. And so in our system, we've designed ways that it can be very, very powerful, not only be self-funding, but actually drive that unit cost of labor down as you're paying higher wages. And especially now with Amazon, with their $15 minimum wage, we just see that more and more out there, that companies are looking and saying, I got to raise my compensation, but I can't just pay more money. How do I get more benefit out of that, more return out of that? Yeah. So that's probably the two main things. And then the third one is just that flexibility. There's more and more data coming available. Companies are changing constantly. And so as we developed the company, we focused on being able to pull in all these disparate data sets, merge them together, make sense of them, and do that without requiring any custom code. So that flexibility allows us to work with different data sets very, very easily. That's one reason why we're able to work with Raymond and their iWarehouse data, merge that in with WMS data and Kronos data, et cetera, and never have to get the developers involved in that. So that flexibility is really one of the things that I think sets us apart.
Interesting. So pretty much everything can kind of integrate into one area for you, right?
Yep, absolutely.
Fair.
The more data, the better. So
definitely, yeah. I think with service level expectations rising and trying to get as operationally efficient as possible, data is the key to really understanding how to do that and how to cut that little bit just to make it that much better. So it's really cool that you guys are harnessing all that and kind of giving that to your customers in an easy to digest way. So, what are, I'm curious, it seems like on your customer side, who are the employers, it sounds like there's a lot of benefit. I'm curious, what is the reaction from the employee side when an operation decides to go to this pay per performance system, and what's their reaction kind of when they know that they're being tracked maybe a little more closely than they have been in the past?
Yeah, it's a great question. I would say when pay for performance is rolled out, and I'd probably say half of our customers use pay for performance, the other half don't. Mm-hmm. So when pay for performance rolls out, I would say the vast majority, probably 80% of the employees are very appreciative of it, because at the end of the day, I'm going to show up for work. I'm going to do my best. If I can get additional compensation for it, fantastic. So there's kind of all upside and no downside. Most companies do have let's just say 10, 15, maybe 20% of employees that they're at the bottom of the bell curve and they have no intention of kind of hitting those goals. So pay for performance for them, they're not going to buy in. And as productivity increases, oftentimes, as those guys go away, they're not replaced. But for the vast majority of people, it's very positive. So that's on a pay for performance side. If you think about even for opportunities where there's no pay for performance out there, what the system enables companies to do and managers to do is treat people fairly and objectively. So there's nothing more frustrating than when you're working really hard and you're working really hard and nobody's even acknowledging that. So one of the things that our customers, it's what we call a supervisor grading report. And on that report, not only does it tell them the people of their team that are underperforming, but also shows people on the team that are overperforming and the steps that they should take to make sure that they're recognizing those good performers. So that if I'm a good worker, I want to be held accountable in a fair manner. I want to be recognized for my hard performance, my hard work, and allows them to do that. So, in the flip side, if I'm underperforming, at least if I'm being trained up and explain what I'm doing, I have fair, objective, frequent feedback. So I know, okay, I'm making an effort. I'm trying harder. I want to be successful here. And I'm getting that feedback in a very fair and objective way. So that helps me be more successful in my job as well.
Definitely. Yeah. From my operations management experience, there's always
We'll be back after a quick break.
You hear a lot about supply chains these days, because if the past couple years have taught us anything, it's that an efficient, well-managed supply chain is absolutely critical to keeping businesses successful and consumers happy. I'm Will Haywood, and I host a podcast called All Business, No Boundaries, where we talk about supply chains, how they work, what happens when they don't, and the innovations that are redefining what's possible in the world of logistics. Join me for insightful interviews with thought leaders and industry experts. We discuss how optimizing supply chains can break down the barriers that are holding businesses back. That's All Business, No Boundaries by DHL Supply Chain. Listen and subscribe wherever you get your podcasts.
Cases where you have an employee and they're saying like, I'm working so hard, but so-and-so is not working as hard as me. And, it's hard sometimes to justify that without, really looking at what their performance is. So, having a tool kind of like Easy Metrics, I think, can really help you figure that out. Because, sometimes employees will say that about other people, and really it's not true. Maybe it's them that's not really performing as well. So you can only kind of believe what you see, right? So, and you can't be everywhere in an operation at once. So, aside from cameras and, data tracking, I think is the best way to look at that, because that can really, and it can also kind of give you, kind of that level set of where the expectation should be. And then you can kind of set that expectation for the employees so they kind of know where they need to be at too. So I think that's really good. And I think, what you guys are doing, I would love to see it in action. So, what kind of steps do you take, if you decide as an operation that you want to go with Easy Metrics and start this really detailed data tracking of your labor? What steps do you take, and how, is it quick implementation? Does it take some time, or how does that go?
So the implementation is pretty rapid as far as getting to the point where you get data coming out of it. Oftentimes, once we get the customer data, we usually have a 2-day on-site with them to talk about their hierarchy, how the processes are set up, what the key metrics are that we want to include in the labor standards, what we call categories and tiers from a cost to serve standpoint they want to be able to gain visibility into, going back to my example of e-commerce versus a retailer. So we map that. We've got the data. Usually within a day or two, they're going to be on live reports. And from there, there's going to be a validation process we're going to go through, et cetera. So the whole implementation might be a 90-day process, but we can usually get to live reports coming out pretty quickly. And from there, it's, validating and training and that type of thing. And what we've found over the time is there's so much information in Easy Metrics, so many tools, that we don't want to just throw them all at the supervisor. It can be a little overwhelming, and they can end up focusing on some of the harder areas and miss some of the low-hanging fruit. So what we've started walking our customers through is the first 30 days, they're getting the reports, and really focusing on what we call missing time. And what's really surprised me being in this industry is we started getting all this data in when we compare paid time, so how much you're paid, and then we compare track time, so all the hours you worked on, and that can include sweeping floors, picking, put away, et cetera, even downtime. But when we track paid hours versus all the track time, almost every customer has about an hour a day per employee of missing time. And most of that's just pure waste. Some of it is, employee tracking errors. Maybe I was working on special projects and I forgot to log into a job code or whatever. But most of it is just, there's 45 minutes during the day that I didn't have any scans and I wasn't working anywhere else, or, I stopped working at 2:45 and my shift ended at 3 o'clock. So there's 15 minutes, and that just adds up throughout the day. So first 30 days, just really focusing on that. And what we find is most of our customers go from a 15 to 20% missing time down to about 4% missing time. And some, if you have job codes for everything, you can obviously get that even lower. But that's just, right there, you're going to save 5-10% of your labor costs just by focusing on driving that waste out. And then from there, now I've got that missing time. So now at least everybody's working for full time that they're being paid for. So the next thing we have our customers focus on is now let's drive down that indirect time, that non-productive time. So everybody should have some, but if I can take that from 19% down to 16%, I'm going to save 3% of my labor costs right there. And just focusing on that. So those are all low-hanging fruit. Then once they've got that down, everybody's working for the time they're paid for. They're working on the productive jobs. Now we can start really focusing on productivity and multiple metric labor standards and, driving that productivity higher. And what we found is about half of the savings comes from productivity, but about half of the savings comes from just driving that waste out of the system as well. And that oftentimes is that low-hanging fruit.
Interesting, yeah. Yeah, I think that goes back to, what I was saying before, like you can't really see everything. So when, somebody's taking like a little 2-minute, 3-minute, maybe 5-minute breather somewhere off in the back aisle or something in operation, you don't necessarily notice that. But over time, it adds up, like you said. So it's really cool that you can see it like that. So, you mentioned actually the job code. So the job code, is that something that the employee is responsible for logging in and out of which job code they're working in, or is that something on like the supervisor level?
So the important thing is we want to get visibility into the full paid day. So if we're pulling in the time clock, I know that you worked 9 hours today. I know 1 hour was overtime, et cetera. Now I need to know what you did during that 9 hours. As long as you're on a scan gun and you're scanning, we're pulling in that WMS data, so I don't need you to tell me anything. I know what you were doing, where you were, how much you picked, how feet you traveled, et cetera. Yeah. But there's certain jobs where you're just not scanning. So it might be sweeping floors. It might be maybe you're unloading trailers and there's no scanning going on there. So for those situations, that's where we use job codes. So I just need you to log in, and Easy Metrics has a kiosk type of system we call Job Track. So you can just pull up your name there and log into unloading, and maybe you and I are on the same team, so we log into the gold team. And so we pull in our hours there, and then we can pull the production data, from whatever information's available. So maybe we're going to give you credit for the unload team gets credit for whatever the receiving team received. So if we received 100 pallets, the unload team gets credit for 100 pallets. But the time that you spent unloading, that's where we use job codes for. Or like I said, if you're sweeping floors, I want you to log into sweeping floors for that half an hour so that we're not applying that time to your productivity, and we know how much did we spend to sweep floors last week, and why did Kevin sweep floors for 4 hours yesterday? That can be good information. Yeah. So when it comes to job codes, there's, like I said, we have a kiosk. We work with Kronos. A lot of companies have Kronos job codes. With Raymond, their iWarehouse, the forklift drivers can have job codes on iWarehouse. We can pull all that information in. Some customers have job codes on their WMS. That's fantastic. And some of our customers have job codes in multiple places, and we'll just pull all that in, merge it all together with the WMS.
Interesting. Yeah, I like that because it creates some accountability too, I think, for the employee, like when they're not doing those jobs that are already tracked through RF scan and stuff like that. It creates accountability to make them take that step and log in and say what they're actually doing. So they're more conscious, I think, of actually doing something, I guess, right? And actually doing work. Because if not, somebody's going to say, well, you weren't logged into anything. What were you doing, right?
Oh, yeah. I actually can't even stress how important it is to get visibility on 100%. And I remember one of our first customers on the system, this was, going way back to 2008, 2009, and they had a value add area that was pretty complex. So they decided when we first rolled out Easy Metrics there that they didn't want to track the value add area. So we're watching all the numbers. Productivity goes up at the end of the year. We get together with the customer and we say, look, we're showing that you saved 16% of your labor costs in the system. And I remember him saying to me, he goes, well, I'm glad you see that, but I'm not showing that in my P&L. So as we investigated it further, what we found happen is the productivity in all the tracked areas, picking, put away, everything else, it went up pretty significantly. But instead of that labor leaving the building, that labor just shifted over to value add. So their cost to do value add skyrocketed. So after we identified that, then we pulled value add in, and now we had all of the visibility, all the work. And then the next year when we went back, then they did say, yes, our savings has gone up about 16%, but it didn't go up until we captured 100% of what was going on there. It was too easy for things to just shift into those other buckets that didn't have visibility.
Yeah, you didn't get the full picture. Interesting. Actually, I had kind of a similar situation where I was in a new distribution startup environment, so everything, was going kind of crazy. We're like very focused on, the main priorities, picking, shipping. And we had somebody who was doing our trash, and that was kind of like his primary responsibility. But he was taking out the trash. We were worried about other things, and the dumpster was outside. We didn't have a dumpster that was up to the door yet, and we didn't have a compactor yet. So we were just getting started, and then finally, like one day, one of the managers said, like, "Do you notice this guy is like, he seems like he just disappears." And then he just reappears when you start thinking about him, and then you don't think anything. And we all started to like scratch our heads. Like, So we didn't have any kind of productivity tracking or anything like that. So we had to like actually kind of do little stakeouts and try to figure out what he was doing. It turned out he was kind of sneaking into the back of the building outside and taking little naps. And so we finally caught him red-handed. But like, just like you said, like being able to capture something like that you don't really realize, and it's kind of almost, out of sight, out of mind a little bit because you're focused on these other things. But even, you're talking about sweeping, tracking those things is really, really important, and being conscious of what's actually going on fully in, the entire operation. I wanted to talk to you today kind of about how we ended up connecting, right? So we ended up connecting on LinkedIn. I guess you guys have posted Easy Metrics blog post. I think one of my other connections commented on it, and that's how I ended up seeing it. I don't know. Everything pops up on the LinkedIn feed, I guess. So the post was really about, I think it was about like a lack of leadership in operations now. I wanted to get your take kind of on what do you think are some of the drivers of that lack of leadership that's out there now?
So I'd say if you think about on a supervisor level, you've got people that are working very, very long days, tend to be understaffed, so they're overseeing large crews. People are spread out. They don't have good information, good data, so they're trying their best to get product out the door. Very stressful type of environment, and not necessarily having the tools or the systems or processes to lead effectively. And so, they're trying their best. Some of them may have just moved up. They might have been the best picker before, and now they're in a supervisor role. So they might be kind of in a new to leadership position, and so they're not necessarily set up for success at that stage, but they're trying to do their best. So I'd say that's probably one of the biggest challenges. I think if you think about being successful in those type of operations, a supervisor or any sort of manager, the mindset can go one of two ways. Either my team is here to support me, make me successful because I'm the boss, or my job is to empower and enable them to be successful, because that's how this company's going to be successful. And I see that especially when we look at pay for performance, and the difference between the leader's role in a pay for performance scenario is pretty fascinating. And I like to say, before there might have been more in the kicking trash cans mode, trying to get people to work faster. Mm-hmm. As soon as you roll out pay for performance, that dynamic changes. And now what happens is that person went from trying to motivate the team to now that person becomes a constraint eliminator. So now the team is coming to that supervisor saying, hey, I am trying to hit my numbers, but this inefficiency is keeping me from being successful. And so now that supervisor is, okay, let's figure out how we can eliminate that. Let's, figure out how we can make you successful. So that person's job is basically supporting that teammate to drive efficiency higher and help that person be successful in the role. That analogy, I think, ties into the blog article that we posted versus it's not about them making me successful. It's about me helping them be as successful as possible, whether it's resources or training or, process improvement or whatever it is. But my role is to enable them versus the other way around. And you probably heard it referred to as an inverted, pyramid is one way of thinking of it. But that analogy is really what we were trying to drive at.
Interesting. Yeah, I think, I definitely agree with you. I think that the speed at which is expected nowadays is definitely a driver for that. Like you said, like maybe somebody was the best picker. So somebody said, oh, okay, we need a supervisor. So they're the best, I guess, at the job. So they're going to do it. But they may have not had any kind of leadership development or training along the way. It's just that, they're the best at the job. So I guess they should be the one, right? So I think that, what you're saying is definitely very true. And I think that, I like the point that you just said about when you start to do the pay per performance, how the employee then actually, they change their way of thinking and they start to think about, what's kind of slowing them down. And I think that that's really important as well because, I think before that, the employees typically, they kind of have a mindset of like, well, this is the way it is and I'm just going to do it the same way all the time. But they don't necessarily think. I mean, some do, but a majority, they don't start to think outside the box like that and think about, oh, well, we could do this instead to make it faster, or, could we try this and that type of thing. So I think that, you're definitely right in saying that it's more of like, I just actually recently I was in this management workshop and they're talking about, how the employee would draw you. And it's definitely like the pyramid, right, where you're at the top and you're in a different color, and then your employees are at the bottom and they're all in the same color. They're all on the same team, right? But they don't include you in the team. So I think it's really important, like you said, that an inverted pyramid to kind of all be on the same team now. And I think that's the way you really kind of empower those employees and, make them feel like you're working with them instead of, they're just working for you and they're just trying to make you happy, I guess.
Yeah, you bring up a good point. If you think about it from a goal alignment standpoint, it's very hard for a supervisor in that role if the employees aren't motivated, if there's nothing, they're just going through the motions. Yeah. What pay for performance allows to do is create that goal alignment where we're all going to be successful if we can drive productivity up and drive our cost to serve down. And as an example, I remember a story one of our supervisors told me once at the old outsourcing company. And she said, before we rolled out pay for performance, I would need to go out to the break room and start yelling at people saying, would you guys get back to work? Break ended 2 minutes ago. Yeah. She goes, after we rolled it out, now I have to go back to the floor early because the workers aren't allowed on the floor without a supervisor out there. And these guys are all wanting to leave break a little bit early to get back to their workstations. And, so from a leadership standpoint, it's much easier to lead a motivated crew than it is to lead a crew that, doesn't want to be there or isn't happy with the company or is just going through the motions. So it definitely makes it a lot easier.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah. And I think as a leader too, it's, it's tough when you have to get so caught up in those types of things, like, it's almost like having kids, trying to discipline them and say, no, like now it's time to eat, but now it's time to work, right? So I think when you eliminate the like everyday kind of stress or like that responsibility of having to watch over them so closely, then you as a leader too, you kind of get to take a step back and think more about strategy and think more about, how could you improve too, and then how could you empower your employees to improve as well, and work with you to help those improvements happen, instead of you just trying to think about it and then worry about everything with them too, and then disciplinary action and all that stuff. So reduction of that definitely is more freeing, I think, for working, and it definitely helps overall to improvement, like you said. So I know that we were going back and forth on LinkedIn a little bit about not only this lack of leadership, but also how things are getting difficult because markets are getting so saturated, I guess, with operations. Where I'm based in New Jersey, in like the Cranberry, Monroe area, New Brunswick area, it's like there's a new distribution center going up. I don't know, every day it seems like there's, and huge, like 1 million square feet, 1.5 million square feet. And so finding staff and even some resources too is difficult to do. And especially when you're talking about leaders and people being, I guess, ready for that leadership role, and kind of just getting thrown into it because a body is needed there. I think the same thing happens with staff as well. So I'm not sure if you guys see the same thing out there, but what's kind of your take on that, and how do you think in the industry we kind of work towards creating that more skilled workforce for distribution centers and operations, because that's becoming like a huge industry. I mean, it's a huge industry already, but it's only going to keep growing as we move more and more online for retail.
So I would say, length of time on the job is critical. One of the challenges, and I think you referenced this before, if I can walk across the street and get another job tomorrow, then that turnover is going to keep me from rising to that level that I could rise at your company and take on more responsibility, et cetera. And it obviously makes it harder. So first thing to address is, how do you make it so you're an employer of distinction, place people want to work? Because I can always go to Amazon, right? I can always go across the street and get paid $15 an hour. So why should I stay here?
You say hello to Amazon and they hire you, right?
Yeah, exactly. So how do I make my company a desirable place to work? And so part of that is being more of an empowered workforce, as you mentioned earlier, holding me to standards, but give me the tools to be successful, and then give me the rewards for being successful. And that's one area that I think Amazon, I believe, drops the ball on. And they're not a customer of ours. I don't work with them. But from what I've read in the papers and some of the less than flattering articles out there, it sounds to me like they're all stick, no carrot. And that type of environment, you can hold people very high and try to drive them hard, but you're not going to build them up. You're not going to benefit from that long-term kind of learning the job and taking pride in what you're doing. So I see a lot of other companies that are fantastic places to work. They treat their people very, very well. They have high expectations, but the crews hit that, and they're rewarded significantly for it in a fair and objective manner. So that would be the first thing I'd really focus on, is how to make it a better place to work without lowering my standards, but doing that by creating common goals and giving people the tools and the fair measurement in order to achieve that. And it's kind of fascinating. So we've been doing this for over 10 years now, as far as selling our type of software with other companies. And what we've seen is, if you look at pay for performance, it ebbs and flows. After 2008, 2009, I remember companies telling me, our pay for performance is they're lucky to have a job. And so there wasn't much buy-in, because it wasn't really needed, or they didn't feel they needed that. You fast forward it to today, and let the receptivity to companies towards pay for performance is much higher than it ever was before. And I think it's because of I need to be able to compensate my employees more without raising my costs. So that's one driver. But also I'm now being held to higher standards. Amazon's changing the game out there as far as what the minimum acceptable level of performance is. So I've got to raise my game. I can't just spend a lot more money. And oh, by the way, I've got this e-commerce thing that's making it so I got to do so much more work to get a case out the door. And so, I'm in a tough spot. And so I think you're just seeing the shift of people looking and saying, okay, what do I do? Automation is part of it, but what do I do to make my workforce as productive as possible? And you got to be on the same team with them. That old style leadership just isn't going to work in that environment. It's got to be that collaborative, working together, taking the hill, and making it worth everybody's while to get there.
Yeah, definitely, I agree. I mean, when I go to the operation I work in now, I drive down the road and I see the signs now hiring at such and such an hour. And I just cringe, and I'm like, oh my God, I hope my employees don't drive down this road. But it's I agree with you definitely. You have to, you have to value the worker, I think, and you have to put in time too. To get them to where you want them to be. But I think, like you said, I've had employees, previous jobs, current job, that I've managed and that have come from Amazon, and they'll tell you that it's tough there as an employee because sometimes I've heard stories there where there's uncertainty as to what shift they're going to work, and then if you can't work that shift because and they just tell you the day 2 days before, and you can't shift your time to work at that time, then it's basically well, you're done. And then I've heard other stuff where they give you 15-minute break, and they said the buildings are so big, by the time you get to the break room, your break is pretty much done. So I think that smaller companies and even bigger companies as well, I think the way to, like you said, the way to kind of get the competitive advantage, I guess, even though Amazon has such an ease to get hired, but I think that if you build your reputation as a good employer, and you offer other benefits, and you treat your employees like they're your team, not like you said, like Amazon, with nothing there for them, just work, right? I think that you really can win in that environment, and you definitely have a better advantage. And I think that the employees that can, or potential hires that can recognize those things about your companies, are typically the ones that are probably going to perform a little better as well. And I think you attract more talented staff in that regard as well. So I definitely think that it's a challenge too. I know, I mentioned on LinkedIn, I was doing another new distribution center startup, and we're trying to get Raymond trucks, and we're this small, what was that one? I think we were at about 200,000 square feet, so not that big, in comparison to an Amazon, who was opening up a 1.2 million square foot building just a couple miles away. So, we just wanted a couple forklifts, and Raymond said, sorry, we got some in and Amazon took them all. And we're talking about a couple hundred of them. So, it's kind of you're going to have to wait a little longer. So it's kind of how do we even, compete, even to get the things that we need to operate? So it's a little crazy, but, I think that, like you said, it's all about, kind of rewarding the employees and, making them feel like they're a part of the team. And I think that as we get into, growing more and more with the distribution industry and market, retention, I think, is going to be a big thing too, because with, turnover and people leaving, you're losing your trained workers as well. And then you have to take the time to train somebody new. And obviously they're not going to come in at the same performance level as somebody who's been there a while. So I think, all the points that you said are very, very key to getting those people in the door and then keeping them inside as well. So yeah, definitely interesting discussion. Do you have anything else to add?
Just the last part, as you were talking about that, we mentioned cost to serve and being able to understand what my cost is. And when you look at it from a retention standpoint or a turnover standpoint, if I can tell my cost is X for a veteran employee, even if I'm paying more and my cost is X plus, whatever, for bringing in a new employee because of that lower productivity, et cetera, it helps be able to quantify what the cost of churn is, and that helps justify some of those changes. Just like our customers will use cost to serve to look at when making certain changes makes sense. So if I know my cost is X to do this function and I can automate that, it helps me figure out, does it make sense or not make sense in order to do some of those things. So that cost to serve information helps quantify a lot of those decisions that you've been talking about.
Definitely, yeah. Yeah, I think, in I guess this day and age, and I think, data is definitely king. So you're definitely providing a great solution there for people to get a hold of data. It sounds like in an easily digestible way, and especially, I really like how you mentioned that you guys kind of will guide the customer into that low-hanging fruit, like you mentioned. So I think that's good, because I think sometimes, like you said, you throw a lot of data at somebody, and it can get overwhelming, and there can be some frustration too, and you can kind of say I don't need this, because it's like taking too much time for you to interpret and understand. So the guidance is really, I think, key for people to see, and especially if you hit that low-hanging fruit and you see this works, then you kind of get hooked and you get into the data and you start to really rely on that data, and it really makes you make improvements and helps your operation and company overall.
Excellent. Well, Kevin, I greatly appreciate your time. This has been an enjoyable conversation today.
Yeah, definitely. Thanks for joining me on the podcast, Dean. So how can, if people want to find out more about you or more about Easy Metrics, how can they do that?
Yeah, our website's easymetrics.com. That's why there's a lot of information on there about the topics we've discussed, and very easy to reach out to us on there as well.
Great. Thank you so much for joining us on the New Warehouse podcast. You can check out all that information and more on newwarehouse.com.
You've been listening to the New Warehouse Podcast with Kevin Lawton. Subscribe and check us out online at thenewwarehouse.com.
Thank you for listening to this episode. If you want more content from the New Warehouse, check out our new video series called All Hands on LinkedIn. Just search for the New Warehouse on LinkedIn and follow along.